Hi there everyone, I'm Shane. This is another process video for a Dungeons & Dragons character idea I had. This one's a samurai monk hybrid. Olodithas, or Ollie, as his friends call him. He's about 16 years old and he's 31st in line to a foreign kingdom. I thought it'd be interesting to do a younger character as I did an older one the last time. This time I kind of had a fairly distinct idea of what I wanted him to look like right away, so I didn't do too many poses. I went right into what I had in my head. I also laid out the anatomy this time, just for practice. I thought it would help the gesture a little more. So you'll see me here just kind of overlaying it on top of basic bones. So much of the anatomy is going to be covered up, but I like doing it sometimes just to overlay clothes on top of it. It makes it more accurate. I was looking at a couple different references for the clothing. I was looking at more modern takes on medieval Japanese and Korean clothing. I thought it'd be cool to kind of mix the two, since it's a fantasy realm after all. So he's got very traditional looking clothes, but they're in more of a modern cut. Also went back a couple of times just to see what would be underneath it. Again, it's not going to be showing in the final picture, but in my mind's eye, just helps everything sit on top of everything else. Sort of added a wrap to his arm there just to make it asymmetrical. Just visual interest, mostly. Characters over a certain level, where I play D&D, get to start with a magic item. I thought the Gauntlets of Ogre Strength would be cool for this character. He's going to be mostly dexterity based, but I thought it'd be kind of interesting to just like reflavor them as Oni gauntlets, give it that more Eastern flavor. Sort of adds to that royal family thing. He's on the younger side as compared to all his siblings, so I figured they would give him something to beef up his martial prowess. You'll see me messing around with the sword quite a bit through the picture. Took me a while to get it sitting properly on the character itself. Just blocking in basic proportions. 15 and 16-year-olds have different like height and head proportions than normal adults, so he's got a bit of a bigger head. As with almost every character I do, I'll redraw the face multiple times. It just helps me chip away different options, and eventually I'll settle on something that I like, usually a combination of all the options I've tried before. See me here just kind of drop the other layers off. I like to layer things on top of previous layers, so I'll just drop the opacity and then draw darker over top. Since he's a wood elf, I figured Ollie might have some of those interesting tattoos. I decided to go a different way later on, but I was messing around with it here. I just sorted out all my layers so I can drop the opacity and just start on the tight lines. Again, one of the benefits of digital, I can just draw something and then erase it easily later on. You'll see that when I draw the sword and just kind of overlay it. And since I've got all the rough shapes already done beneath, just now I can focus on just how the clothing's gonna fit on the character himself, so you can see the folds just kind of like pop in there. I also did like an arm wrap on one of his arms. Just as kind of like a backstory, he's a prince, pretty much last in line, but I figured he's still got rivals, so he's survived assassination attempts. He's got like a scar on one arm that he kind of covers up, a bit self-conscious. You can see me kind of working on the Oni gauntlets here. Cool little detail for anyone that wants to look a bit closer. So I switched over to the face here. I switched my brush to a non-uniform brush. Gives it a more interesting line weight and draws your eye a little more. I start out with the uniform brush though, and I decide to change it up in a bit here. Kind of a subtle thing. You don't really notice it unless I point it out, but your eye's kind of like drawn to the more interesting lines. And here you can see me kind of adding lines to the face, but when you're drawing something, especially line art, every single line you add adds age. Especially on women, you'll notice. But since he's fairly young, I ended up taking those out, and I just added in the shading and coloring stage. I'm a big fan of K-dramas, and I've recently been watching a historical drama called The Crown Clown, and the kings all have this very cool-looking red robe with like golden dragons and designs on it. I thought that'd be kind of cool. He's royalty as well, so kind of mix that in here. That being said, it is a little busy, so I put it on a different layer in case I wanted to not use it later. It also makes it easier for coloring. Same technique here. I put the sword on a different layer over top of everything just so I can draw the whole thing and then I can erase out what I don't need. Just makes it easier for the perspective, and when I'm moving it around, it's also easier. Didn't go too over the top with his katana here. It's a basic katana, but since they're not really built into D&D by default, I didn't give him like a magic one or anything like that. It's just standard royal family katana. Kind of a little detail you see me draw in there, then I immediately erase it out because it's not going to be showing anywhere. I was thinking about putting a second sword on there, but mechanically he's only really going to be using the one, so I didn't see the need for it. Also, it was really frustrating getting it in the right place. So my perspective of the arm was a bit off. You'll see I move it eventually, shift his hand around. It was working during the gesture, but when I put things over top of it, it just didn't seem to look right. One of the downsides is when you rotate something in Clip Studio, and I think in Photoshop as well, it anti-aliases it by default, and you can't really turn that off. Yeah, so you'll see me just kind of layering the clothing on top again, just trying to figure out. I was looking at reference to see how the sword would sit underneath his overcoat here. And you don't really notice it. It's kind of at an angle where it would just push out the back. So you would see it kind of popping up the back of his overcoat. More little details I threw in here. I ended up taking them out because I thought it was a bit too busy. As I've said on previous characters before, I like to have some spots on the character where your eyes can just rest and have focus spots instead. That way when it's not too busy, you can just kind of like look at the character and look at very specific points of interest that I picked out. Made the scabbard a little fancier, just kind of worked it into his wood elf heritage, had some leaves on the outside here. Again, keeping things fairly simple for the feet. I wanted them like comfortable shoes that he could move around in, fight in. Nothing that's gonna like hinder him and his movement. Since he's a samurai monk, I figure he's gonna be fighting unarmored most of the time, so you'll see me kind of fooling around with the foot foreshortening here. I'd gotten it to a point where it looked alright, but looking back on it later, you'll see I changed it a little bit more. It looks a bit too flat when you're like zoomed out, kind of like a peg leg. Even though the angle itself, there's nothing really wrong with it, it just looks a little awkward, so I changed it. So I'm going back to the face, just tweaking a couple things. Like I said, I redraw the face quite a bit on my characters, and here I was just messing around with his proportions a little bit, his hair a little bit. Again, I added too many lines to the face, so he looked older than I wanted him to look, so I ended up taking out a bunch of that. And I try adding some more tattoos here. They look fine, a little bit busy for my taste though, but I end up doing something even busier afterwards. So I thought it'd be interesting if the character had something more unique about him, since he's from like a different far eastern region. I thought the wood elves of this area might have like these wooden protrusions kind of grow as they age. I thought it'd be a little more unique than just having elves that live in the woods, so I end up giving him kind of a green skin, and since he's fairly young, the protrusions aren't that prominent, they're just kind of starting out. But I kind of envision as he gets like hundreds of years older, there'll be like giant branches just kind of like enveloping him as he ages. Kind of think like what bark skin might do, in my head anyways. This kind of idea is populating my head while I'm doing this. I just figure since he's got such a big family, like maybe the male wood elves, theirs are more spikier, they're very direct, whereas like female wood elves might have like this softer, maybe curved branches kind of extruding from them. Just something to think about. I thought it'd be interesting. And if I ever decide to do any more of his siblings, just for giggles, it may make it look more visually interesting. You'll see here, that's where I got the idea for the more rounded branch here, and then I took it out later. So here's just me going over with the flat colors. Like I said, I was basing his coat kind of like on a Korean king. So dark red, gold shoulders. You'll see I pop that in later. But his gauntlets were also kind of, I figured like a very red Oni. It's just what I had in my head. So I decided to make them a little darker later on just to pop them out a little more. In hindsight, I might end up doing something in later characters where I'll leave out some of the details like on the rope, where that way I can just have them on a different layer, and when I'm filling in colors here, it might make it a bit faster. We'll see how it goes. I like to change things pretty much every time I draw or paint something, just to see if I can find new ways to speed things up or a more interesting way to do it, just to kind of change up the monotony of drawing the same way every time. So like I'd said earlier, I kind of give him that green tint to his skin. Got a very Beast Boy looking vibe. And here's where I changed the angle of his foot here. Takes me a couple more tries at it, but I eventually get something that I'm happy with that doesn't make him look like he has a peg leg. Nice thing about having the main colors all in their own layer, you can just kind of quickly adjust them. So you'll see me here just kind of like trying different shades, picking something that I think looks good with the other colors. You'll see that I adjust the colors quite a bit. I'm always envious of people who can come up with a color scheme just off the top of their head or use it from something else and just stick to it, but doesn't seem like I can work like that. I'll always adjust colors and just see what I think looks more interesting. So since I knew I was going to be leaving this as a cel-shaded color style, I ended up coloring the lines here. Gives it just this little bit extra vibrancy that I really like. I do like to leave some areas black as it kind of outlines it, gives it a more animated style, but I find if you leave the lines just black, it looks a little flatter than I would hope for. But since there's so many different ways to do this, there's different styles that some people like. Some people like just like complementary colors on the lines. Some people like just darker shades of the color that's underneath it. And they can all work depending on your style. But I find here I went for mostly just like a darker color of the underlying color, but a couple places you'll see I'll add in something more complementary, like I'll add like a dark purple where it would typically be black. So I block in here and just multiply layer with a fairly unsaturated purple. Find it's a good starting color, and since I can just adjust things later, I'll just do it all in one color, and I can erase out what I don't need, or just change the hue and saturation later. I just drew in like a quick arrow and was like, okay, the light's going to be coming from this direction, but I end up changing that a little bit later, which you'll see. I also like drawing the shadows out as a very hard edge with a very stark brush. Makes it easier to blend later. Even if it's like a different material, you can always shade it afterwards or just kind of blend it and soften it. But the reverse isn't as true. It kind of blocked in the whole color, and then here you can see I used that selection and then inverted it, and I kind of paint over with a warm color. I was thinking maybe just like a kind of like a sunset glow, but it ends up taking over the colors a bit too much, so I tone it back later on. It'd be interesting in like more like a comic setting or something like that, where you had him like in a certain scene, but as just like a way to show off the character, I find if your lighting's a bit too strong, you couldn't really tell that he was green-skinned. So you'll see here I select in just the face and I try to paint in a little green here, but I didn't like the look of it that much, so I toned down the lighting a bit more. You can also see me here just softening the shadows that I was talking about earlier. Just on like his overcoat, figure it'd be like a softer material. I'd actually painted a rim light earlier, just to test a couple of things, and I end up bringing it back here. I find a rim light really pops characters. I know it's kind of a cliche, but it does make them stand out, and people use it for a reason. Painted a little more warm light on his back there, but I tone it down quite a bit, and you'll see I select just the shadow again, and I paint in some bounce lighting here. You're really only going to see it on the face for the most part. It's one of the more reflective surfaces. You'll see I paint a little on the sword as well, but I take it out just because I don't want the focus down there. You'd probably see more of it. Couple different passes here, just the different material of the wood on his face. And you'd see it on the fairly white or tan clothing on his arm there, so I do tone it down again because I don't want the interest drawn there too much, but I do want people to notice it. Just a little more rim light on the area I want people to focus, so mostly the face and the head there. You'll see I paint in a little subsurface scattering to the ears here, just the light shining through. You'd see it'd be a bit more red than it is here. So just going over one of the final passes here. Just kind of changing the light on some of the materials. I figure the golden dragons on his shoulders would be more of like a shiny satin gold. I was experimenting with a couple different textures here to see if I wanted to put anything over top. It didn't look very good though. Another happy accident that I stumbled across here, I was just toying with some brushes, and one of these lace brushes kind of sat well, so I ended up using that on the overcoat. And then when I took it out, I noticed that the fabric hanging down was very flat, so I painted it a little bit. This is mostly a cel-shaded character look, but I did end up painting some parts of him just to make it look less flat. And I went around and added a second color to most of the highlights there. Again, to make it less flat looking, Just gives it an interesting look. If you've ever watched any anime movies, Makoto Shinkai specifically, he does that a lot, and it looks gorgeous, so. Thanks for watching the video, guys. That's my Samurai Monk Olodithas, Ollie. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more of this, just like and subscribe. Do all the YouTube things, and let me know what you guys want to see in future videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.